Hello, everyone. I am very excited today to be talking with a fabulous lady who I've known for several years through the wine industry. I'm Priya Rao with VineRoutes, and I'm talking with Nabilah Rawji. She is a sommelier, a wine educator, and co-founder of Vinequity, plus founder of her own company, Vinopath. Welcome, Nabilah.
Hi, happy to be here.
I wanted to ask you about all the different aspects of the wine industry that you work in, first of all, because primarily I know you from your work with Vinequity and as a wine educator. But you mentioned that teaching was not really your first sort of, it wasn't your guiding light in terms of what you wanted to do in the industry. So how did you fall into that? And where did your passion for wine begin?
So I guess we'll start with my passion for wine begins somewhere very vaguely and just that I had an awareness of it. I grew up in California and I liked the idea of wine as this thing that could capture lots of different smells and aromas and could be constantly changing. But I don't come from a family that drinks. And I made the transition into hospitality and restaurants specifically to pursue wine. And at the time, I wasn't really sure exactly what I wanted to do within the sphere of wine, but I knew that, okay, Toronto's a city with a bustling restaurant scene, and I knew that I'd be based here for a while. So that seemed like the most sensible point of entry and the most flexible to start from. So that's kind of how I landed in wine. And I love restaurants. I love the buzz of it. I like being on the floor. I love interacting with all the many different people that you meet. But one of the things that did attract me to wine was that it would be a way to stay connected to the outdoors and nature and potentially be able to travel. And when I looked at all these other folks who were working in wine at what seemed like a very successful level, they all had a different sort of collection of things that they did. There wasn't just one thing. So I was open to that maybe my work would evolve to take on more than just one piece. In terms of teaching, I fell into that mostly as the realities of coming back to work as a parent kind of set in. And when I and my partner ended up pregnant, I really thought that I was going to go right back to the floor of a restaurant, and I never really saw that changing. We thought that we'd kind of be ships passing in the night for a time, maybe, but we'd take our shifts, right?
Right.
But then when it came down to it and looking at the reality of what my daughter needed and our household needed, it made more sense to go back and teach. So that's that.
And how do you enjoy that as even though it wasn't part of your sort of greater plan, do you enjoy the teaching aspect of it?
I
And
love
what is
teaching.
it about it that
I love teaching because it involves a lot of the same things I liked about engaging with guests on the restaurant floor, and that you get to engage with someone about something that you're passionate about and you enjoy, and you get to watch like little light bulbs go off and you see these flickers of like recognition and understanding, like, oh my gosh, or oh, I've never had this before, I never thought about it in this way. And you're also similarly engaging with people who are passionate and interested about wine, whether they're a student coming to wine studies for whatever reason, or a guest who's joined you at a restaurant. There's a common bond in enjoying wine.
Mhm. And how's the composition of your classes evolved over the years in terms of, first of all, of course, ethnic diversity, but what about age? I
Yeah.
have this vision that all the people that take your courses are, really young people, like in their early 20s. Is that true, or do you have a lot of people
Mm.
from different age groups coming in too?
So I will say that like my perspective on teaching is only reflective of like post pandemic, and I think that for folks who've been teaching much longer than that, that they maybe have a different perspective on the shifts and how
Mhm.
classes have changed, or the folks attending them. um, since I've been teaching, my classes are quite varied, whether that's with Song Factory or teaching the CAPS classes, George Brown, or any of George Brown's independent programming. I have folks ranging from fairly, early in their 20s, all through folks who are retired and looking for a way to stay, intellectually engaged or pursue something else that they enjoy outside of their primary career. So it really runs the gamut. In terms of folks in the industry, out of the industry, I'd say we're nearly a 50-50 split across all the places that I teach, between whether folks are specifically in the trade already and looking to gain more knowledge, or if they're just really enthusiastic about wine.
And as a founder of Vinequity, obviously representation is important to you. In terms of the industry at large, what have you seen there in your time in the industry, and where do you see it kind of going? Like, do you think it's now, do you think it's a a road that is just now easily accessible by anybody, or is there still work to be done?
I guess a little bit of both. For sure, I've seen it change. And again, I'm not entirely sure how much of that is like my experience has changed. Is like I've built a reputation and grown my own personal network that like I feel like I notice things more or that I have an easier time. I certainly notice more diverse folks when I walk into a trade event, which is a stark change from when I started. But also, just the industry at large in Toronto has changed. It's grown so dramatically since I started about 10 years ago. When I started, it was a much smaller group of somms, and you had to struggle a little bit more to find folks who were at the same stage as you that you could study with or learn with. And now that's just not true. There is such a wide range of folks who are involved in wine and studying at all the different levels that you can find somebody who you are approaching it in the same way. You resonate with them, they resonate with you. And I think that's a big piece of it, is it's not just one version of wine people in Toronto anymore, and that makes it much more welcoming to anyone else looking to get into it. I do think that there's a ton more work to do. I'm proud of the work that Vinequity that we've done over the last few years. We're certainly a key piece of the changes that I can see. We have a number of folks who've come through our programming, whether that's mentorship or a scholarship, who come back through multiple phases, and we see them progress in their careers and get promotions and move forward and, become, masters of their own, professional networks and all of that. So I'm proud of that. I'm glad that we've done that work. I think that we're at a moment that's very vulnerable where we're seeing a pushback against this concept of like, what is the value of diversity in any particular industry? We're at a moment where people are really reactionary and there's not a lot of space for nuance. People really want to draw a stark line in the sand and stand on one side of it. And that makes me concerned for our future and for the future of this work, because I think we are just kind of getting started. I think my attentions are more focused on folks entering the wine industry and at the very beginning stages of their career, whereas I think previously I had spent a bit more focus to folks who were in the middle. I think that was me looking out for like my own immediate experience, like what had I just wished I had in the last 2 years or 3 years at that stage of my career. But looking at the longevity of folks of color in wine, we need to look to folks entering this as an early stage career right now.
Mhm. I think one of the changes I've seen in terms of diversity is also more conversation around pairing wines with foods from different cultures, or just different kinds of foods. Like it used to be a very much red wine with red meat, white wine with white meat kind of conversation, traditionally speaking. And what grows together goes together, that whole idea. But what about when you're in a country that wine is not grown, but you can still appreciate wine with all sorts of cuisine? So I definitely think that that's been a huge increase in the industry, and one of the reasons we need more diversity.
100%. And I think there's lots of folks who are doing great work, including some of my other Vinequity co-founders like Beverly Crandon. And in general, I think that lines with a broader, like easing up and open-mindedness from consumers, that like they're a little bit less attached to very specific, like, oh, I really only like French wine or I only do Italian stuff. So I think now is the moment to continue to explore all of it.
Do you find that kind of sentiment still exists of people who are like staunchly in the red wine only camp, or I only drink champagne, no other sparkling wine for me?
Yeah. And unfortunately, I find that my experience has been that a lot of times when folks are looking to come and have quite an experience on wine and they've made up their mind that they're going to spend a lot on wine, that they're a little bit extra attached to that kind of thing. Okay. So I've worked with tasting menus that are a little bit more seafood focused, and I've had more than my fair share of guests who insist that their pairing menu for wines be entirely full-bodied red wines. Like, if that's what you want and that's what you enjoy, we're going to make you happy, but you're not going to get the full essence of what you're hoping for in a pairing situation.
I'm curious actually about students that take some of the entry level courses that you teach. Mm-hmm. Do you find that you have students that come in with that sort of idea of, I only like one kind of wine, or I prefer this to the other, and then they expand their palate?
Almost never. Almost never. I can think of maybe one or two instances across at least 100 plus students. Mm-hmm. And even then, they weren't that stuck to it. Give it a few weeks and they're usually excited about some other things that they said they didn't like to begin with.
Right. It's funny because I remember when I started, and I think this is kind of the trajectory when you start your wine path. You like things that are a little bit
Oh
sweeter
yeah.
at the beginning, and everybody tells you, "Oh, you're going to get tired of that, and you're going to go for the drier styles." And everything. I'm like, no, no, I know what I like, and I'm going to always like this. And then, sure enough, that does change. Is that just a natural evolution of the palate, or is it an evolution of appreciation?
I think it's a little bit of both. And I think and I'm willing to be wrong on this, but I think it's specific to us as North Americans. If
Mm.
you think about our progression and how we have beverages with our food, you probably have fruit juice as a kid. And then at some point, you're allowed soda. And then as you get a little bit older, maybe you graduate into cocktails and or coolers of some kind. And then maybe you feel like you're a little more grown up and you want to try a wine. And that usually means some version of something sweet or off dry, or if not, at least very, very fruity and maybe hiding a little more sugar than you realize in it. And then as you start to continue to taste and evolve, like you get more comfortable with bitterness as you age. And I know that there's other kind of scientific merit behind that. So I think you get more okay with less sugar. And I think that's just kind of the natural progression of it. I 100% started out drinking, like, I think my first glass of wine at a restaurant when I was finally of age was a glass of white Zinfandel with a plate of salmon.
Yep, I do remember being quite the fan of White Zinfandel. And I'm almost embarrassed to say that now. And then I think, well, why? You like what you like at any given stage of your life, right?
Yep.
And
My graduation out of sweet wines
mhm,
came actually because I liked spicy and peppery flavors in wine. And for whatever reason, a lot of the red wines I would encounter that I was choosing off of, like Trader Joe's shelves or Cost Plus World Market were Italian varieties that were being done in California. And there is a lot of that there. And those often feature those kind of flavor profiles. For me, that was the way that I was able to transition out and appreciate things other than wines that were purely just sweet or fruity.
the other thing actually that you mentioned when in our written interview is that you appreciate that there's less of a dogma around wine.
Mm.
Can you just touch on that a little bit, what you mean by that?
Yeah. So again, like maybe just reflective of where I was at when I first started and the type of folks I was dealing with and or learning from. But when I started, I really felt a lot more resistance from guests I was working with, or even colleagues had very, very strong opinions about, oh, only specific types of like our noble varieties of vinifera are the only ones that are worthwhile or interesting. And, I worked in places that focused on very niche Italian varieties. And so I had one little hub there that had an appreciation for something that was a bit different. And I struggled to find broad acceptance for that in more general consumer bases or in other restaurants. And now, as I'm teaching, even as I look at the way wine programs are evolving in other Toronto restaurants, you just see everything else, right? And I find that guests are okay if they don't know how to pronounce the wine a bit more now, or they don't immediately just ask for a Sauvignon Blanc. I mean, people still ask for their Pinot Grigio. I think that will forever and always be the case, but I just find people are a little bit more relaxed about it, and they're more open to something that they don't recognize.
So one of the services you offer as part of your own company is seller management and personal shopping. What would you say are some tips for a consumer who doesn't know much about wine when they're going into the LCBO and they want to buy something that is not in their shopping cart regularly? Do you have any general tips?
Yeah, my favorite ones are, and I get this one from students a lot. Head to the vintages section.
Mhm.
Find, if you can, go to a flagship store, head to their vintages section, and then try to see what's similar or at least coming from like the same country as somewhere that you normally enjoy,
Yeah.
and find something between $20 to $40
Okay.
if you can. If you're, because most people will splash out at least a little bit for the $25 bottle.
Mhm.
Just save up, bump up the extra couple of bucks, and then see what that's like, right? Or explore back labels, just read things and see what sparks your interest. If you're not feeling shy, talk to the product consultants. A lot of them are incredibly knowledgeable and can help kind of guide you. But I find 25 to 40 is kind of a sweet spot, and it's not totally inaccessible, but it's also genuinely getting you a wine that is better crafted and probably from a more specific selection of grapes. So you get to start to experience some of the things that we talk about in wine as being so special and unique.
Mhm. All right. Well, having said that, now I know you have a bottle of wine that you're going to share with us. So can you tell us what the wine is and what it is about that specific wine or winery that makes it special to you?
So this is Vieta Ramon's. I first encountered this winery when I was working with Lindsay Groves at Tironi way back in the day, and they are in Friuli, so in the northeast of Italy, and they do lots of zippy dry white wines with some really interesting, smoky kind of minerality notes I appreciate. And I'm not a huge Sauvignon Blanc fan, but I had gone to one of these seminars when they were in town and they had their winery principal here, and they poured this 2008 Pierre Sauvignon Blanc, and it totally changed my wine. One on Sauvignon Blanc, two on Sauvignon Blanc aged and done in oak, and it's my last bottle of my back vintage. So this is here. It's for me. I don't know exactly when I'm going to open it, but it's a winery that I really appreciate. It's a grape that kind of was a it changed my mind about a grape, and I thought it was just like a good reference point to my trajectory in wine.
Hey, I'm with you on the Sauvignon Blanc too. I mean, specifically, Sauvignon Blanc from New Zealand is not my favorite wine, but I've always been quite amazed at how other countries do Sauvignon Blanc. So I'm gonna have to try one from Italy. Thank you for
Yeah.
putting the
Do you
question.
like Bordeaux Blanc?
I do. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of in the same vein. So
Okay.
I liked this, and then I ended up finally getting to try some kind of old school style Bordeaux Blanc, and turns out I have a real soft spot for that approach to Sauvignon Blanc.
Great. Well, I'm going to put that on my shopping list. And before I let you go, can you tell me what in is happening in the industry right now, or just in wine and food at large that excites you?
Oh, I am so ill qualified to answer this question right now. We don't go out anymore.
I guess that's what happens when you have a 4-year-old at home.
Yeah. I mean, I can tell you that I'm so excited to go back. I feel like there's been an absolute explosion of interesting and cool restaurants that have opened up. I have had a couple of absolutely divine meals recently when I've managed to escape. I had such an amazing time at Salt Wine Bar a couple of weeks ago, and at Oh My, just delightful food and beverage experiences, not even specifically just wine.
Toronto is a great city for
Yeah,
good food and good wine, isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely.
we're very fortunate here. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your day, and I'm excited to see what comes next for Vinequity and what comes next for you.
All right. Thanks so much for chatting.
Thanks,
Bye.
Kayla.